Graceful, methodical, hard to learn and even harder to master. Bow is one of Braver's two weapons. It's intended to be the range side of Braver's toolkit, but unfortunately it tends to fall short with the players, most completely disregarding it over just using katana. With the upcoming Braver expansion scheduled for April, I thought why not try to help by pushing the right advice, vision and player-based feedback in hopes of creating the perfect bow we all wish to see, casuals and pro players alike. So, in this video, we'll be gazing into the world of bow and how to bring it back to Braver. Before we get started, if you're unfamiliar with the bow, I highly recommend looking at these videos here. They cover everything from the basics, how the weapon is played, all the way to in-depth discussions on high-level gameplay and intricate details surrounding the weapon. If there's anything you want to know about the bow, you will find it in one of these videos here. So, take a look. Support some creators while you're at it. Also, to preface this, despite its flaws, bow is a gorgeous weapon to play, making gameplay look like a dance between you and your enemy when mastered. That is one thing I don't want to take away from the weapon, that feeling, that identity. With that said, here's what I think bow needs to become the weapon of players' dreams. Having spoken to a lot of bow players and bravers as a whole, both casual and professional, formulated all the common points and topics into this table here. These are the points I'll be going over in this video, and of course, if you're curious, I'll have the table linked in the description, along with all the videos referenced earlier. Moving on to the specifics, I'll start with the overall weapon issues, followed by Photon Arts, and lastly followed by Braver topics and miscellaneous points. Everything will be timestamped in case you want to skip through. Now, to start things off, this first topic is one mentioned universally by every player I spoke to, that being bow's potency values. Bow, at the moment, has some of the lowest damage output in the game when compared with other weapons, especially when you consider the time, effort and practice it takes to navigate the weapon properly. Its main damage sources are all charged PAs, on top of which can very easily miss their targets, or be difficult to get the full value out of. While this is technically okay, as it's part of why bow is the elegant weapon it is, the payoff of being able to capitalize on everything bow has to offer isn't nearly enough to justify the difficulty of reaching that level of skill. Originally, I believe an attempt was made to address this using long-range advantage, which multiple classes received. However, I believe along with the other classes that received this, it proved to be more of a detriment than a positive, though I'll get into that later. After going through various sources of feedback, guides, data spreadsheets, and more, I found most claim bow needs roughly 15 to 20% more potency across all its attacks. While this may come as a surprise, that's how much of an increase bow would need to meet the standards of other weapons. Though to make matters worse, these numbers were based on before most classes had their expansions. Because of bow's state, the vast majority of players who played it seriously since dropped the weapon, thus making it even harder to find up-to-date and accurate information. Meaning for every class having their expansion before Braver, other than Slayer and Waker, bow may need upwards of 25, 30 or possibly even 40% potency across the board. But if the rest of these suggestions in this video were to be made, 10 or 15% may be more than enough. The next prominent issue for bow is bow's step counter. Currently, it is extremely weak and generally bow players avoid it at all costs. Problem is, considering how slow many of bow's attack options are, at times it can be unavoidable having to step counter, either against fast-paced enemies or if you're having to cancel Photon Arts that have longer animations like Ceaseless draw. Fortunately, however, an idea was brought to light which could massively help bow's step counter. The idea being to give Step Counter a new skill tree skill, let's call it Step Counter Amplify Impact, which upon a successful Step Counter boosts your next Photon Art by roughly 200 potency. No, not by 200%, by a flat 200 potency specifically. The logic behind this is by making it a flat value rather than a percentage, it boosts the damage of the weaker Photon Arts far more than the longer and stronger ones. As Bow can't use many of its stronger options against fast-paced enemies, this change to the Step Counter would give Bow far better options and help in making the Step Counter a fully functional part of Bow's kit. Players will now have the option between using Elusion and Step Counter to answer anything the enemy has to throw at them. Elusion still being an irreplaceable amount of damage, but now, with this change, Step Counter would allow for other shorter PAs to perform extremely well in situations that call for them. In totality, this would ease the casual experience, giving players more opportunities for more damage, while giving pro players far more expression in theirs. Speaking of impact, the next mechanic I would like to mention is Bow's attack impact. This would be a minor change and is most likely already an idea that plenty already have, but I'm including it here just in case it eludes anyone. Currently, Bow attack impact can be built very quickly and is a very important part of Bow's gameplay. But it is extremely easy to fill the gauge and hold on to it for a significantly longer amount of time than is ideal. So I propose allowing this feature to be able to be stacked. This would allow players to make use of how quickly they can build it without it interrupting their gameplay every time it's fully built. 2 stacks would be great, but 3 stacks would be perfect, I believe, since that allows you to make full use of both Brave Combat Finisher and your Photon Blast within quick succession without being completely overstacked. Additionally, an icon could be added here to show how many stacks the players have, and furthermore, visual effects are always welcome indicators. And lastly, for overall Bow, is Elusion's Maneuverability. Elusion is a great tool in both practice and concept for Bow, giving it the elegant flow to gameplay that it has, and from what I'm told, is a nice homage to the movement Bow had back in the original. Right now, however, by the request of many, Bow being able to Elusion out of PAs slightly sooner than what is currently possible would satisfy many players in making Bow feel a lot more streamlined and comfortable to play. It can already be quite difficult getting used to Elusion's timings, but allowing Elusion to be used slightly sooner should make it easier for new players to pick up the Bow, along with making life a little easier for the casual players while not taking away what makes Bow for the older players and the pros. Overall, these 4 points are key components that Bow needs for its gameplay. While these changes and adjustments alone would already be incredible to have, there's still a fair bit more that needs to be discussed. Now in this section, I'll be moving on to Bow's Photon Arts. Bow is a very complex weapon as it technically has 9 different Photon Arts at its disposal. While they currently work quite well together, they are not without their flaws. Starting with the elephant in the room, the first PA I'll be discussing is Flex Arrow, specifically the first charged Flex Arrow. When it comes to fighting larger enemies or bosses, single charge Flex Arrow is your go-to PA. Any enemy with a large enough hitbox to have more than 3 pierces will generally have the player using charged Flex Arrow for the majority of the fight. While this is fine, the issue arises when the weak point is fairly small on the enemy, resulting in the first hit or 2 being on a weak point and the preceding hits either being on a non-weak point or, even worse, on damage null areas. While this is very similar to Rifle's Raising Shot, Bow doesn't have the benefit of having various options which yield equal if not higher damage results when Flex Arrow isn't doing an ideal amount of damage. If an Assault Rifle Ranger is compromised or unable to use Raising Shot, blazing shot still does an incredible amount of damage, along with the landmines and grenades rifle has for close combat. Also, this comparison isn't to say that rifle is a perfect weapon either, revolt aim currently being in a less than ideal position, for example. But the one weapon that has a similar PA to bow's main source of damage also has alternatives which far surpass bow's alternative options. After discussing this with as many bow players as I could, I found two possible solutions for this issue. Option 1 would be to make flex arrows pierce hits all count as weak point damage if the first hit is on a weak point. This would be the stronger and most beneficial option, as this stops bow from being punished against big enemies with shallow weak points for using the PA that's intended for such enemies, such as Darkfall's Aegis and Ceaseless hitting twice or thrice and then losing the rest of the damage. Alternatively, option 2 would be to make flex arrows pierce hits have bonus damage against non-weak points if the first hit was on a weak point. This would be a bit more complicated, but retain the skill required of bow to be efficient, while still making things easier overall for casual players as well. A bit of maths here, but practically what this implies is that if a weak point equates to 1.5 more damage and a non-weak point equates to 1.0, then flex arrow would pierce the weak point and proceed to do 1.25 damage against any non-weak point. The numbers could be adjusted of course, but that's the general gist of the idea. Overall, either of these options would be beneficial for bow players of all levels, as they're not being punished for a hitbox which is out of their control, making the lives of casual players better while still allowing the skill necessary to remain the same for pro players. Moving on to the next Photon Art, this is also a heavily debated topic amongst bow players, that being Charged Dimensional Ray. Currently, when you use Charged Dimensional Ray, you stock up 5 photonic arrows, which fire when you deal damage to the enemy using any of bow's Photon Arts. While this can be increased to 8 with Type 3 tech customizations, it tends to run out within seconds of casting it. For example, one uncharged dimensional ray is 10 hits minimum, meaning chances are if you have a dimensional ray currently active while you're stocking up on charged arrows, the charged arrows will be gone before you've had the chance to use them intently, even with the Type 3 craft. To make that situation worse, dimensional ray doesn't always land on weak points as you'd hope or aim for, but the arrow stocks will attack wherever the damage was dealt. Meaning, if your dimensional ray is landing constantly on a non-weak point, the entire batch of arrows you just stocked up may disappear and have gone on the completely wrong part of the enemy. Overall, this generally causes players to ignore the skill entirely, outside of the opening of a fight, and at times when the boss can't be attacked or if there's not enough time to get a supercharged flex arrow in. So, to fix this issue, I have 2 proposable solutions and 1 adjustment idea. The easiest solution would simply be to triple or quadruple the amount of arrows Charged Dimensional Ray stocks, going from 5 to 15 by default, and 8 to 25 with the Type 3 craft. This would give players more reason to consider whether or not to continue fighting or to restock arrows, enhancing the complexity of bow's gameplay for pro players while also making it easier for casual players, allowing their stocks to be far more effective and last longer. Additionally, this could be indicated in a similar fashion to attack impact that Ranger's Rifle, Force's Rod and Fighter's Twin Daggers have, showing the number of stocks remaining in the corner of the normal attack button. The second solution would instead be to make Charged Dimensional Ray's buff into a timed buff as opposed to a stock-based buff. This would be the most convenient solution as players would have a set time before they would need to rebuff, if they wish to do so. And additionally could be indicated in a similar fashion to other active skills with timed effects. In example, Hunter's Physique, Fighter's Overload or Slayer's Overdrive. In terms of how long the duration could last, however, it would need to be carefully tested to see just how powerful a time-based buff would be, thus meaning the damage output could be lowered slightly to accommodate for this. Otherwise, I believe 15 to 20 seconds would be satisfactory, as this syncs well with many bosses' break durations. Similarly to the increased stocks, this will give pro players an extra level of urgency when it comes to rebuffing before break phases or any burst opportunities. And for the casual bow players, again, further gives them more damage for a far longer time, allowing for easier play. And lastly, the adjustment idea. This may be a bit controversial, but Dimensional Ray's Type 3 craft could be changed entirely to function similarly to Barter's Type 1 craft or Phantom's lock-on bomb from the base game. With this, Charged Dimensional Ray would change to attack the target based on where the player is locked onto. Generally speaking, this would be a very beneficial craft, but it would come at the expense of the other two, thus giving players more expression within their gameplay and their choices. And overall, for the sake of balance, if any of these solutions were to be implemented, Charged Dimensional Ray wouldn't need that much of a damage buff, if any at all, as the longer usage from casting it once would provide a sizable increase in damage. And we wouldn't want it to become too powerful either, lest we create another situation like Jet Boots' Fierce Wave. And finally, the last PA which I want to talk about is the charged variant of Ceaseless Draw. Unlike the other two PAs mentioned prior, the change requested here isn't as drastic as the other two. Charged Ceaseless Draw is known to be one of the longest PAs in the game, along with being heavily backloaded. While this is fine, as it's part of what makes Bow's gameplay what it is, an idea that a few players have had was to allow a unique version of Elusion to be used just prior to firing the final shot. What this entails is, just before the final shot, the user is given access to Elusion, and upon a successful dodge and counter, you can continue the final shot instead of using the normal Elusion counter. Functionally, this would be a huge change, and overall could be more detrimental than good if players start using Ceaseless Draw repeatedly without consequence, but I thought it would still be a good idea to mention. Likewise, I believe this may not be entirely necessary at all if the change to Brave Spirit I'm about to go over is accepted. And now for the final section, the Braver topics and miscellaneous points. This section, while still focused on Bow, may have some tie over with Katana and Braver as a whole. First thing I intended to talk about, as I mentioned earlier, is one thing most Bravers forgot about completely because of how subtle and, in Bow's case, how negligible it can be. That being Brave Spirit. Currently, Brave Spirit for Bow increases normal attack damage, Elusion Plus, and Elusion Counter damage by 5%, 5%, and 15% respectively, along with some PP recovery as well. While this may not seem bad on paper, the damage in Bow's overall gameplay tends to go quite unnoticed. While it's definitely helpful for Bow, and Elusion could definitely do with more damage naturally, it can still be extremely underwhelming. Especially considering against fast-paced enemies, Elusion can miss entirely at times, thus rendering both the damage and PP recovery completely useless. Having spoken to various players, many of which mentioned Bow feeling slightly too slow in certain aspects, I proposed the idea to make Brave Spirit provide Bow with a minor attack speed buff, or a PA charge time buff. Attack speed tends to be an extremely delicate property to adjust, alongside charge speed. I think a small boost of 3, 5 or 10% to both attack speed and charge time would be insanely beneficial for Bow's gameplay. If Brave Spirit were to boost both attack speed and charge time, then 3 to 5% would be more than enough. If it were to only boost one of the two, then 5 or 10% would be more than enough. In turn, the previous suggestion for Ceaseless Draw's early Elusion wouldn't be entirely necessary if this change were to happen to Brave Spirit, as the additional speeds would provide new players with plenty of time to use the whole PA, along with giving pro players even more flexibility with weaving Ceaseless into areas where it was never possible before. Moving on from there, we have a slightly more Braver orientated feature here, that being Brave Combat. Something mentioned by various players, even outside of the Braver community, was the state of Brave Combat. At the moment, Brave combat to most Bravers feels very lackluster. The mode tends to be activated and instantly cast aside to be able to use the finisher, making the initial cast and buff during Brave combat appear to be negligible, unless you're using certain Art Customisations, which carry their own problems too. An idea a few players had, however, was to add some form of a gauge to Brave combat to increase the damage done by the finisher. This would have the player use the 15 or 30 seconds to fill up the gauge while in Brave combat, and when the gauge is full, the finisher could do at max double damage. This would make Brave combat far more interactive and encourage players to be more proactive with the ability, rather than just pressing it twice and not making any use of the buffed state. Additionally, one idea mentioned by a few was having a changed animation for this boosted finisher. Though so far the new visuals from many class expansions has been more than satisfactory, so this may not be entirely necessary. Moving on to the final point of this video, Braver Art Customisations is another topic many Bravers as a whole feel quite conflicted over. While Katana's case is controversial between Bravers, Bow's tech arts are agreed to have been poorly executed. This is mostly due to the complex nature of Bow, where due to the complexity of the gameplay, some of the customizations can result in a loss of damage instead of a gain, thus making the casual experience harder as they are being penalized at times by systems designed to benefit the player. Pro players at least know how to make use of the customizations properly, but that doesn't take away from the fact that it is incredibly discouraging having to go through your customs to avoid negatives rather than looking for positives. The solution to this, mentioned by most, was simply to lessen or entirely remove the drawbacks from most, if not all, of Bow's customizations. The increased PP required can remain the same, along with having the bug fixed on Type 1 Ceaseless Draw, where at every customization level its PP cost is reduced by 15%, but the drawbacks for most arts can definitely be lessened, or have the bonuses increased alternatively. And finally, the last point, which applies to multiple classes and not just Bow Braver, is long range advantage. And this has been a talking point for a large portion of the player base for more negative than positive reasons, mostly because it functionally makes classes harder to balance and function properly. You're rewarded with more damage for not having aggro, but the increased damage makes you more likely to get aggro, which would then result in you losing the benefits of long range advantage counterintuitively. Furthermore, classes with weapons that would benefit from naturally having 15% more damage are locked out of that damage when doing anything alone like Arc's Records or general solo content like dual quests, while also being locked out of being buffed extensively because this buff needs to account for long range advantage. Bow's case in this is no different, if not notably worse. As expressed throughout this video, Bow's damage is disparagingly low, to the point that Bow players will often greatly benefit from long range advantage and be able to keep the bonus damage consistently throughout a fight. But because, in a twisted sense, Bow's buffed damage is still too low to surpass or even reach the damage of other players that have aggro. Now picture that level of damage when a Bow player is alone, and you get the disheartening reality that many Bow players face. As many players of many classes agree, I think the common consensus for long range advantage is for it to be removed entirely. Conceptually, the idea of having more damage for being at a distance with a long-ranged weapon makes sense, but functionally for the game it causes more harm than good. The perfect range mechanic that rifle, twin machine guns and wired lance have does this idea correctly. Long-range advantage, however, not so much. And thus, that covers all the suggestions and ideas I found in regards to Bow. This video has been in the works for quite a few months now, to which I now realise how big of a task it was. But with the help of many generous players, I got as much information, which I believe to be both accurate and beneficial, as I could in hopes of making the perfect bow. As mentioned in the intro, as much as there are all these issues, bow is a beautiful weapon to play. Sega did a great job conceptually and with the overall feeling of the weapon, and for that I give them credit. However, as made clear in this video, there is a lot keeping bow from being the glorious weapon many players can see within it. While it's a huge shot in the dark, I just hope this video is able to unite the players and with that unity push this video far enough to reach Sega, opening their eyes to be able to see exactly what the players want. Hopefully though, with all my time playing bow, this will be one shot that doesn't miss. And as mentioned, I want to thank Jumbo, Argus, Chi, Ribeyes, Ondi, Katie, Keropi, and especially Knight and Flo. All the input, help, guidance, and lessons I had which made this video possible, along with the Fleet Discord and all the people that work together to upkeep and maintain the verification data storage. So, with that said, here's to hoping we all get the bow we're looking for in April. Thank you for watching.